come in. I have two quick announcements. Number one, note the passing of Art Lefebvre, who for years had been the chair of our one of our subcommittees, passed away a couple days ago. And secondly, when we do attendance, I anticipate the arrival of Steve Schmidt. Mayor Eddy is ill, and Brian Coleman is bringing home our Brant County 4-H team from the Royal Winter Fair. There was 324 entrants. Brant County had 2 in the top 10, first and the 7th, and our first place winner was also the champion show person. So Brant County has a champion at this year's Royal Winter Fair. Anyone have any additions to the agenda? Member Miller?
Yes, I have an item I'd like to bring up.
Seeing none, seeking approval. Moved by Member Pierce, seconded by Member Miller. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. There are no delegations listed this evening. Anyone with pecuniary interest, please do so at the appropriate time. Seeking approval of the minutes, noting there are 2 sets. Moved by Member Carty, moving both. Seeking a seconder, Member Simons. Questions, comments on those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Anyone have any business arising from either of those minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to public hearings under the Planning Act to receive information. And the first one is ZBA 21-18-DN, and I'll ask our planner, Dan, to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've received a zoning bylaw amendment application for a property located at 43 McBay Road. The agent is Howard Snodgrass Consulting, and the applicant is Jack Monzo. The property is located just east of Colburn Street East and west of East Harris Road. The subject lands have an area of approximately 6.3 acres, frontage of 180 meters, and a depth of 150 meters. And you'll notice the subject lands are highlighted in 2 kind of thicknesses of red there. The thicker portion with the 2 ponds is the portion that we'll be dealing with tonight. The current official plan designation is rural residential. The intent of this designation is to recognize existing concentrations of large lot residential development. Current zoning on the property is agricultural. The proposal is to rezone the portion highlighted there from agricultural to rural residential. And there's a related application that has come forward as well, considering for a future consent application to facilitate additional residential development. As part of the application submission, the applicant and the agent have submitted a planning justification outlining the rural residential zoning compliance for the lots that are proposed, as well as a OMAFRA MDS calculation, which identifies the land as a Type B land use, and the property is subject to a reduced MDS setback requirement as outlined in guideline number 12. Other restrictions on the property, so we have the portion, the ponds that are there, which the agent will speak to, are regulated by the GRCA. However, they have no concerns with filling in these man-made ponds. As well, the entire property does fall within the archaeological area for that may have some archaeological significance. So as part of this application, as well as the future consent application, engineering staff will review new entrances for safe sight lines. The applicants will be required to provide a proof of potable water. The applicants will also be required to provide a detailed drainage and grading plan that outlines how the property is going to function in terms of drainage and grading, as well as a condition of the severance provide that archaeological study that identifies if there are any risk of any findings. So in terms of next steps, the application will continue to receive formal comments, which will then be prepared into a planning staff report where a formal recommendation will be established. The further notice for the next public hearing will be circulated, and at the next formal public meeting, a recommendation will be presented by staff, followed by which the Planning Advisory Committee will make a decision. I'll handle any questions if there are any.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Dan. I'm bringing this up because this is 43 McBay Road, but it applies equally or more so to 120 McBay Road, so the next one. But you said it in your slide, to go through and put a house up there, they have to prove that they have a potable water supply, correct? But they don't have to do they do not have to do a hydrogeological study, correct? In other words, they don't have to prove how their use of water would affect anybody else's in the area. Like if we're putting up if we're doing a gravel pit, they have to have hydroge studies. There was a development we approved last month, had to have major hydrogeological studies. But when we do house, each one has to prove that they have a potable supply of water. But they don't have to show how it affects the whole area, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that the request for a hydrogeological could be part of the application if it's determined by staff that it's a requirement. Typically, the proof of potable water is a requirement, and if staff feel that it should be taken that next step, the hydrogeological would be required as well as part of the severance application.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to put that onus on one particular one, but I'm just wondering, and I'll go back, like, obviously we've allowed quite a bit of development in this area, and I've heard it more than once. Potable water is a bit of an issue in this area. I'm just saying what I've heard. Mount Pleasant was the same way. I heard, some wells running dry there and so forth. So I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking out loud, but like I say, I know you talk about, we just have to prove for that particular site potable water, but nobody's looking at the area as a whole, correct? And I'm just wondering if that's something maybe down the road we should be thinking about. So, okay, thank you, Dan.
Member Chambers?
I'm just wondering, Mr. Chairman, through you, if the planner can elaborate on guideline number 12 and how that interacts with the application.
Through Mr. Chair, because the application is within a designation that is not agricultural, it's considered a type B land use. There is an existing livestock barn across the street. The MDS calculation requires that a calculation be completed based on the size of the barn, how many livestock, type of manure storage, and this generates a setback number. However, the MDS calculations provide a number of different guidelines, and in this case, guideline 12 can apply to this property because there are at least 4 existing dwellings on a separate lot that are closer to the livestock barn than the one proposed here. So then, in that case, it enjoys a reduced setback of being further away than 4 existing dwellings.
Any other member of committee with a question or planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or agent of the applicant here would like to present? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The name's Snodgrass, and the address is on file. With reference to the question that Member Chamber asked, if you look at the overhead slide, you'll see the separation distance is 271 meters between the proposed building site and the horse barn. Guideline 12 of the handbook, MDS handbook, states that if you have 4 other residences that are in closer proximity than the 271, then in essence it doesn't apply. Dan, do you have the one slide that shows the new lot? Okay, just leave it there for the minute. What is proposed here is to create a new lot with approximately 40 meters frontage, and these ponds have not been filled in with water now for, I'm going to say, at least 2 or 3 years. And because they're man-made, meaning they're private, Conservation Authority has no objections to the creation of a lot here, because we're going to have to put some fill along this property line. And we have an email from the authority already indicating that they have no objections, as long as any fill that's placed here is done under their direction or it's subject to a GRCA permit. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of the questions that I would answer. The only other thing I would just pick up on is the question asked about water. The county's water supply generally looks at lots on an individual basis. And to date, we've been able to show that with 3 previous severances here, going back, well, before I had the stroke when they were dealt with, it was, we had potable water there, like 12 or 14 gallons per minute. So there are portions of along Langford Church Road where there is susceptibility to sulfur and or limited water supplies. But in this area, the wells that have gone in here have thus far proven good. So that's the extent of the information, Mr. Chairman.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Snodgrass. So those ponds that are shown are no longer ponds, they're just dried up beds? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they are. That's correct. There's still a tributary or a stream that goes through here and outlets here down into the creek. But in essence, those are no longer ponds that are in existence.
So even though that's the case, the applicant has chosen to place the home at the rear of the property rather than closer to the road?
Well, that's just simply because there's approximately 1 acre of building site here at the rear of the property on the lot to be created, and it made more sense to use established soil horizon than to build a house out front where you're going to be using imported fill and you'd have to compact it.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our applicant? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, how does the committee wish to deal with the application? Member Pierce?
Move to receive.
Seeking a seconder. Second by Member Simons. Questions or concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor to receive as information? Opposed? It's carried. This application will come forward, as you know, Mr. Snodgrass, at a later date with a recommendation from staff. Moving on to 7B, ZBA 23-18-DN, and I'll ask our planner to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application is a rezoning application received for the property located at 120 McBay Road. The agent is also Mr. Snodgrass. The applicant is Pierce and Birdsall. And the recommendation this evening is that the item be received for information purposes only. We'll also be looking for direction from the committee as it relates to an official plan interpretation. And third, that a second information be scheduled prior to a formal recommendation meeting. So the property is located on the east side of McBay Road, just across the intersection of Hammond Road and McBay. The property currently has a frontage of 145 meters and the depth of 1,000 meters with an area of approximately 106 acres. The current official plan designation is agricultural with a little bit of natural heritage in the rear. And the intent of the agricultural designation is to encourage and promote agricultural land for agricultural activities. The current zoning on the property is agricultural and natural heritage. The proposal is essentially a rezoning application to rezone the lands from agricultural to rural residential. But as you notice the current designation is currently agricultural, and the applicant will be requesting direction from the committee for an interpretation to change that designation, or to interpret that designation as rural residential. And I'll get into some more details, and the applicant will as well. And this will also facilitate a future consent application for the creation of one new residential lot. Once again, the applicant has provided justification for zoning compliance, and was also provided some justification for the official plan interpretation. And then once again, the MDS calculation, it's a rural residential designation, so it's a type B land use. However, this property also enjoys the MDS reduction of outlined in guideline number 12. So the official plan interpretation, you can see here the previous OP, which precedes our current official plan. You can see the red circle there highlights the intersection of McBay and Hammond Road. And I have an arrow pointing to the location of the subject lands where the rezoning or the proposed lot is proposed here. And if we look at our current official plan, the same circle at the same intersection with the arrow pointing to the current designation. One is rural residential in our previous official plan, and the current official plan is agricultural. And in this graphic, I've just simply overlaid the two, so the darker area is our current official plan, and if we overlay what the previous official plan was, you can see the lighter area here with the dashed brown line kind of will show you where that may fall, and then the proposed lands to be rezoned, and that's where the proposed lot is. You can see if that interpretation did move forward, you can see the potential there. There's additional room for additional lots if it was feasible. Some other restrictions on the property. The subject lands are regulated by the GRCA, a small portion there along the frontage, however not in the area proposed for rezoning or for development. And the property does fall within the regulation or archaeological area and will require the appropriate studies to be done. Similar to the previous application, greater detail will be reviewed by staff as it relates to entrances, water supply, drainage and grading, and then the archaeological. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this item is to be received for information purposes only. And following the agent's presentation, we'll be looking for staff's direction on the official plan interpretation, and that a second information meeting be scheduled prior to a recommendation. The application is dependent on the interpretation, so this is why we'd like to have a second information meeting so that we can present all the information with staff's review of the interpretation. And following that information meeting, a recommendation meeting would be held, and further notice would be given at that time so that the residents have an opportunity to voice concerns. I should also note that there is a letter that was submitted from an abutting property owner who had concerns in regards to the application. So at this time, I'll just take any questions if there are any.
Member of committee, Member Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just a question, the concern that came in, was it about potable water?
The concern is attached to your application, John, near the back.
Sorry, I didn't see that. My apologies.
It's near the back of the application. It's an individual letter. While he's searching for it, does anyone else have a question? Member Miller?
Yes, through you to Dan. What do you call that when you have a certain designation in the official plan, and then you take away that designation, but you down designate, or there's a term for that in the planning lexicon there.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's the term I'm familiar with. I'm not sure if there's a formal planning jargon word. Downgrading.
Okay. What I'm getting at is, are we allowed to do that? I know we did, but I'm saying, are we allowed?
That would be a great question for Mr. Trotter.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Miller, typically that's done through an official plan amendment, right? But council might recall we had a similar application up on Blue Lake Road about 2 years ago, and we had a similar request because it was very similar to this in that if step one in this case is council almost has to make that determination as to whether these lands are in or out in terms of are they rural residential or are they agricultural? Because if they're agricultural, then it changes the entire nature of this application. So that's kind of step one here, but it's typically done with an official plan amendment. We brought it forward in the same manner as we did the Blue Lake Road application, just because that's how we did it before, and it makes sense to do it that way. That way the applicant doesn't have to spend a lot of money on additional studies for OPAs and things like that if council doesn't feel they're needed. But that's, in our opinion, that's kind of step one in this case.
Member Pierce, did you find that? I did, thank you. You're comfortable with it? Yeah. Okay, no further question on it? Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, say applicant or an agent of the applicant here would like to present, please come forward. We already know your name, Howard.
I would ask the committee to look at the overhead that is here on the front. This is the interpretation of the designation that I have taken rather than that has been submitted by your staff. And in essence, there's a narrow sliver of the existing proposed lot that is in the rural residential designation. And my request to the committee is to interpret this designation for this lot and this lot only. The question put to you by staff is to extend the designation all the way down as per the overlay that showed the comparison. That is not my request. My request is for one lot only. And with this interpretation, Dan, if you can go back to the overhead that shows the MDS calcs, similar to the Monzo application, you can see here that the proposed distance of 341 meters is between the horse barn and the building site. There are 4 other houses that are closer than the proposed building site, hence compliance with MDS exists. I would also indicate there is a dairy farm roughly here where my red dot is, and it complies with that operation as well, even though the livestock operation has gone out of business in terms of livestock. It was the client's understanding that when they created the 2 previous lots, this one and this one, back in, I think it was 03 and 07, that the designation would allow them 1 additional lot. Hence, when they made a request to the county back a couple months ago, they were surprised to find out of a potential change or down designation. It was a real surprise to them to find out that they now have to go through a potential official plan amendment. Hence, that's why I am asking the committee to accept the interpretation of the narrow sliver of residential designation that is in the proposed law to be created. Again, I'm not indicating there's any potential for more. We're just asking for the one lot. In terms of water in this area, again, it's mixed. It's my client's understanding that most of the houses along this stretch of Langford Church Road have good water and reliable supplies. However, there are instances between this property, Dan, if you could put up the MDS map. It's going to be up in this area, further to the west, that it's hit and miss. Again, there are variable water supplies in the area. We're aware of that. For the most part, it's my client's understanding that the wells in that area do produce good quality water. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, I think that's the extent of the information I can cover at this time.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Snodgrass. On your very first slide, you showed that sliver that was already in the correct zone. Of the frontage for that lot, how many meters are within that sliver?
It'd be a few. I didn't put any guesstimate on it because it's an interpretation. That's the reason we're here in front of the committee tonight, is to ask for a favorable interpretation. As Mr. Trotter said, there has been a down designation here at an earlier date. Those are my words, not his. And what we're here tonight is to ask for your permission to reestablish the designation for this area only and for one lot only.
And what was mentioned earlier was the whole triangle, so to speak.
And I'm asking you not to do that.
You're asking for just one lot.
Correct.
And that looks like about a fifth of the lot, so, to me anyway. So it could be as much as 20 meters.
I wouldn't say it's 20 meters. I'd say if the proposed lot's 40 meters.
Oh,
take a fifth of
I
that,
was thinking,
8
yeah.
meters.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing none? Thank you. Any
you.
member of the audience would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll go back to committee. Please note before you move recommendation on this that there is a second information meeting scheduled. So when you move it to receive, please note there's a second information. Member Cardy, moving to receive, seeking a seconder. Second by Member Gatward. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Moving on to C, application from John Islet at 239 Governors Road East, ZBA 20-18-RA, and we're going to change planners at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. We have received a zoning bylaw amendment application on 239 Governors Road East. The applicant, the lands are about 9 acres. They are currently being used for agricultural related commercial business. The lands are designated agricultural and natural heritage. The intent of official plan, it allows for agricultural related commercial and industrial uses which directly support the agricultural operation. The current zoning is site-specific agricultural, which allows for establishment. It allows for a dog kennel and a single detached dwelling, which is accessory to the permitted uses. The applicant is proposing to amend the current site-specific zoning to allow the continuation of servicing and parking of tractor trailers. There is DAC Checker Produce Limited, that is the business that is located on the property, and they have a number of tractor trailers, so the applicant wishes to recognize that as a legal existing use, and also removal of the kennel use, which was never established since the zoning was passed. A couple of issues that could be that should be highlighted here is encroachment into the natural heritage area and the traffic and parking of trailers. If you can see that this area here, it is regulated by Grand River Conservation. Trailers is kind of encroaching into the natural heritage area. This application has been circulated to various agencies at this time, and we are waiting comments from those. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or an agent of the applicant here would like to present? Please come forward. State your name and address.
John Eilert, and now I preside in New Hamburg, not even in Brant County anymore. But anyway, the public, or the trailers, have been parked there for nigh on to 14 years now. As I wasn't aware that this wasn't even available to happen. I understood I could park trailers there, but trucks and whatever. So anyway, at this time, I thought, well, I'll better get this on the road and make sure it's legal to do this. So this is what's really happening. It was kind of a surprise to me, I guess, when we got talking about it. So, and they have been a good client. They've been there that long, and it's nice to have guys that pay the rent on time and be there. And as far as traffic, trailers come and go, but they're not really, I don't think, a traffic problem. To my vision anyway, they've never been a problem to me anyway. Okay. Mr. Chairman, is that all you need?
Yep. Just stay there for a second. Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing none? Thank you.
Okay, John.
Any member of the audience would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member in the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing none? Committee, how would you wish to deal with this application? Member Miller?
Move to receive.
That's information. Seeking a second, or second by Member Cardy. Questions or comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. This will come back at a future planning meeting for final approval. Moving on to 8, public hearings under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. And we're going to change planners again. No, we're not. You're still here. Dan's later on. And I'll ask Rujika to proceed whenever she is ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. The subject lands are located at 743 Glenmorris Road West in the former township of South Dumfries. The lands are designated agricultural and natural heritage in the official plan and currently zoned temporary agriculture and natural heritage as well. The applicant has applied to temporarily rezone the subject property in order to allow the garden suite for a period of 10 years. The existing structure, it was once used as a principal residence by the applicants. However, since it is a permanent structure and it does not meet the definition of the garden suite as stated in the Planning Act and official plan, planning staff is recommending a temporary use of maximum of 3 years to allow the secondary dwelling. This has been discussed with the applicant, and applicant has agreed to this change. The applicant will be required to enter into a new development agreement to allow a secondary dwelling. No concerns were raised through the circulation of this application. Staff is of the opinion that the amended proposal conforms to the policies of provincial policy statement and the County of Brant official plan. It is being recommended that the proposed rezoning be approved. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, so the applicant here would like to present. You don't have to, but there may be questions from the committee. So I'd ask you to... I don't think you have any further to present. No, but there might be questions, and if there is a question, if a member of committee raises their hand and has a question, I'll have to call you forward to respond to it. Is there any member of committee that has a question of the applicant? Seeing no one? Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, turn it back to the committee. How do you wish to deal with this application? Member Miller?
The application.
Seeking a seconder, seconded by Member Cardy. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Is carried. This will go forward to council approximately 3 weeks from this evening for final approval. Now we're going to change planners. So we're going to be looking at 8B, Mayor Logan, 24 King Street South, ZBA 17-18-DN, and when Dan is ready, he will present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application being presented was presented to Planning Advisory Committee last month for information, and this evening the application at 24 King Street South from Aaron Logan is being presented with the recommendation that the application be approved. The subject lands are located, the application proposes to rezone a portion of the subject lands from agricultural to suburban residential to facilitate the concurrent consent application for the creation of a new lot having a frontage of 45 meters and an area of 6,300 square meters. The property is located on the east side of King Street South and is divided by the settlement boundary of Oakland. The subject lands currently have a frontage of 100 meters, a depth of 600 meters, and an area of approximately 35 acres. The current land use designation on the property in the official plan, the portion to be rezoned is located within the settlement boundary, so it's designated suburban residential with some natural heritage, and you'll see the rear portion of the property is outside of the settlement boundary, which is designated agricultural with natural heritage. The current zoning on the property is agricultural and natural heritage, and has a small pocket of open space 1 special provision which recognizes a former waste disposal site. As part of the review and circulation of the application to various commenting agencies, comments have returned from the GRCA highlighting no concerns as the proposed lot to be created is outside of proposed development, is outside of the regulation limit. The subject lands do fall within an area identified to possibly have some archaeological significance, so a report would be required as part of this consent application, as well as a number of items to be reviewed as part of consent application as conditions, again dealing with entrances, water, lot drainage and grading, and archaeological. In conclusion, planning staff is supportive of the rezoning as a request as consistent with provincial policies and facilitates residential development within the suburban residential designation of the official plan. It's being recommended that the application be approved. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or an agent of the applicant here would like to present?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Aaron Logan. I live at 14 King North in Oakland, and I'm here to answer any questions you have.
Any member of committee with a question of our applicant? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thanks.
Turn it back to committee. How do you wish to deal with this application? Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, turn it back to committee. How does committee wish to deal with this application? Member Cardy? Move it. Seeking a seconder, Member Gatward. Any questions or comments? Seeing none. Oh, you have a question, Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, through you, the archaeological area that is on the northern boundary of this proposed rezoning, if the lot size was reduced, would that be required? Because we all know what archaeological evaluations or digs can cost.
Right, to respond through Mr. Chair, the archaeological requirement is applied if any portion of the subject lands fall within that kind of bubble identified by the ministry mapping. So in this case, you know, a larger portion of the subject lands do fall within the area, not necessarily where the lot's being created. The study will be reduced, the scope of the study will be reduced to the area being disturbed as part of the development of the driveway, the dwelling location. So he won't have to complete the study based on the total area of the subject lands as is shown on the screen outlined in red. It will be more restricted to the footprint of the building in that location with the driveway in any area that's being disturbed.
Okay, thank you. And this mapping that you get for these archaeological areas comes from the province?
Through Mr. Chair, the mapping comes from the ministry and typically is kind of a buffering around any kind of natural heritage features, waterways, typical settlement patterns of any indigenous, unless my managers have anything more to add to where and how often the mapping is updated.
Well, the reason I asked is because this area is more than 6 miles outside of the Grand River, and that's why I asked that question.
If I may, because I worked on the mapping for the archaeological areas, the ministry has a certain set of criteria that determines when it's applied. Major water courses, it's within, I believe it's about 120 meters of major water, it might be 300 meters, I forget the number. And I think for smaller water courses, it's about 100 meters. There's also things like topography and other things that come into play when they're looking at it. So when the mapping was done, it's added to the official plan. We used water courses as the, and did a setback off of those to figure out where the high likelihood is of resources.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question? Seeing none, then I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. This application will go forward to council in approximately 3 weeks, the next council meeting for final approval. That concludes public hearings. We'll move on to consent items. There are no consent items to be approved. There is one consent item to be received. Member Pierce moves to receive, seeking a seconder, seconded by Member Chambers. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. There are no committee reports listed. There are no staff reports. There is one communication from Hydro One, and that is on your addendum that you received this evening. How do you wish to deal with it? Member Gatward?
I'll move to receive.
Move to receive, seeking a seconder, and Member Cardy. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor to receive? Opposed? It's carried. Other business, Member Miller, you have an item.
I do, Mr. Chair, thank you. In our Friday package, we had a site plan application. matter of an application for site plan control for a grow-up that they came here a couple months ago and asking for, I believe, a zoning bylaw amendment. And it was granted. And what I'd like to know is, when something comes before us and it's approved and life goes on, it moves on, and then we find out that that particular facility is going to be close to 5 times the size of what we originally were looking at and what the public thought they were looking at, do they not have to come back and like, still effective, I guess is what I'm asking. Like how can, I don't know, I don't understand how this can happen, something like this.
My question to you, is there not a date at the top of that when that's going to be heard?
The date's October 26th, but it wasn't bumped, the site plan application was not bumped up. So that's, and I might choose to go that route, but I'd like to find out some more information about.
It appears as if Manager Trotter is going to respond to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bylaw that council approved is in effect, and the applicant has every right to amend what they bring forward at the site plan approval stage. The item was put in the Friday file for exactly this reason. We don't believe that there has been a site plan bump up request, so we're just processing as we normally would. But that would be something that if council chooses to do that, you can do that. But we actually spoke with our solicitor. At the time, it was Nancy Smith who was working the file at the time, and asked her that exact question. You know, if council approves a bylaw pertaining to a particular property, can then you see a change in it? And yes, the answer was yes, you can. So it's that is what is before us. So that is exactly why we brought it, or we put it in the Friday file.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I appreciate, Rob, your answer. And actually, I'm going to be meeting with Ryan this Thursday about this. So after that, how much time do we have to bump it up? If I bumped it up this week, that's fine. If I ask for a bump up.
Yeah, council can bump it up at any time before it gets approval, of course, and then we can put it on the council agenda and bring it forward for you to approve it as opposed to at the staff level.
Okay. It's quite an issue. So thanks, Rob.
Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I haven't read that particular piece of correspondence yet. However, listening to the director, should we not make a request at committee to have it bumped up if the committee so chooses, so that it can go through the channels rather than have an individual person ask for a bump up?
Well, if you're looking to me to rule on it, my ruling would be no, it is not listed for consideration this evening. So if you want a consideration of it, you should have got it on the addendum for this evening if you wanted to talk about it. That's my ruling.
Well, I didn't know anything about it, Mr.
Well,
Chairman.
I can't help that.
So then, I guess the bump up request, if it came to council through you to the director, is that soon enough?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we can receive a bump up request at any time. So I mean, you can ask us to do it now. You can ask us. Any councillor can ask us to do it tomorrow or whenever you see fit. So it's
So
up
an
to you.
individual can ask for it?
But not an individual, a councillor or,
Yes, that's what
a
I
staff
meant.
member. Can
Yeah,
ask
so
for
it
the
doesn't
bump.
have to go to CDC,
No,
for
it does not.
instance?
No, it does not.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else with a question? Seeing none. General Manager's update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few things to update on. In the planning division, we've hired 2 new positions, or filled 2 positions. One is a zoning technician, which was approved through the department review. So that's a new hire, new position. And we have also filled in the GIS technician, which is the mapping position. The person starts next Monday on the 12th. We are also about to advertised for 2 vacancies. One is a new position, which is a development planner, which was also approved by council, and one is the backfilling of the filling of the vacancy for the senior policy planner, which was vacated by when Brandon left. The other thing I wanted to update on is the lot grading technician, which was a position that was approved, I believe, a year ago. It was filled in June. What we're finding actually is the amount of work that person's doing is quite a bit higher than what we were anticipating. You'll recall when we went through the budget process, that was, I believe, 90% funded through application fees and permitting fees. So actually, person's really quite busy. A little bit more is actually happening through, for just, I'm going to say, existing situations where there are complaints and questions and concerns that are coming up. But all in all, person's quite busy and quite active. So we're seeing that the person's involved with some site alteration applications. There's been some issues that have come up that councillors may have heard about. The issue on 47 Walnut, they're involved with things like that, but also permits. And what happens, there's initial screening that happens when applications come in to determine if it is required to go through a permit process or a site alteration. So we deal with quite a number of those which don't require any sort of permit. But there's an initial screening, we just deal with them and allow the permits to go without any additional approvals or review. And also I just wanted to point out, I'm not certain if you've got these, but the building permit activity summaries were given this month. And again, we're somewhere around triple the applications that we had last year, and revenues somewhere around 3 times what it was last year. And we had budgeted for a certain amount of revenue to come in for that, and I think we're somewhere around $700,000 or $800,000 above the revenue projections that we had in last year's budget. And that's just because of the volume. Oh, it's 2 things. It's volume, but also when we do permit revenue projections, especially for residential, we use it on a guess on what the construction value is. And we tend to be conservative on those. We're somewhere around $250,000 for construction value. We're actually looking to increase that a little bit more, probably about $350,000. And for next year's budget, we're going to be looking at that amount for our revenue projections, as well as looking at potentially averaging somewhere around 400 or 500 units for next year. That's all I have.
A member of committee with a question or director? Member Chambers? Then Miller.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the General Manager. Prior to the Ontario Municipal Board being revamped into what it is now, whatever it's called, councils could appeal Committee of Adjustment decisions. I'm just wondering, has that changed with the revamping of the Ontario Municipal Board? Under the new system, can councils still appeal Committee of Adjustment decisions?
I don't know. I would assume yes, but we can get back to you with an answer on that. It's actually a really good question.
Member Miller?
Well, that is a good segue there, Councillor Chambers. Because I wanted to ask, through you, Mr. Chair, to the General Manager of Planning about the Committee of Adjustment. And they hear minor variances, correct? They also do property standards. And I was looking at the list of applications they're hearing, and, one of them was, somebody wanted a larger deck than was allowed under the bylaws. But we also have that hog barn going up on the 5th concession, or proposed anyways. And in that one, the MDS, they want to shrink it, and the minimum distance separation goes into the settlement area of Burford by 300 meters. Like, to me, that's a huge minor variance. And I would argue that would almost need an official plan amendment. And I guess what I'm asking is, where do you draw the line? How do you see that? Because this, it just encumbers and impacts such a huge area, and yet it's going before the Committee of Adjustment. I think at the very least, it should come to this committee and give everybody their due to at least speak at it. I talked to Ryan, and he said that the notices went out 60 meters. And And I guess that's what the Planning Act says, it has to go within 60 meters of the subject property. But yet at the same time, they're asking for an amendment of 300 meters into the settlement area of Burford. It doesn't make sense, and I just want to ask, like Councillor Pierce said, where do you draw the line on something like this?
Yeah, there are tests in the Planning Act. I think there's 4 tests that have to be met to determine what constitutes minor in nature. So when the assessment's being done, and in general terms, when assessments are being done, we make sure that they can meet those 4 tests. In this case here, they're from what I recall of the site, and Dan might have to help me on this one, but there's other mitigating factors on this one here. It's like, where's the best position for this? There's a water course involved. There's some environmental features as well. And I think the nature of the operation on this property is, I'm going to say, a bit unique. It's a certain type of operation that is not conventional. Dan might be able to talk to a little bit better, but I say in a case like that, I don't know what the options are if it's not an official, if it's not a minor variance application, and it's deemed not to be minor in nature, or it's deemed to be minor in nature by, say, the Board of Adjustment. I think the opportunities are to appeal it, and I think that's probably the options, and it gets before the LPAT, or the Ontario Municipal Board. I think it still is for the minor variances, but it still goes through the appeal process and can be heard at a hearing. At that point, if council wanted to defend it at the hearing, they could, and they could use our solicitor to defend their position at that hearing if our solicitor felt it was defendable.
My apologies, Dan, you were the one responding. And by the way, I appreciate it. What I'm asking, Mark, is can you relook at this and confirm that this is indeed a minor variance and that it should be done by the Committee of Adjustment? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Certainly we can. And we can, I'm not certain what the status of the application is. I think you said it's coming before the...
Well, it was deferred from October. Now I look at November's and I see it's possibly there, which I don't understand. Is it there or is it not? And that's next week, and that's why I want to know, that's why I'm asking tonight. Do we know if it's coming up?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I've been working with the applicant to come up with some other options and kind of assess the situation based on the response that we've received. It will not be on the agenda for November. Perhaps we're looking at December. It really depends on kind of how the applicant responds to the requests of staff and the requests of the residents and the councillors.
Okay, well, thank you, Dan. And again, my request to you, the gentleman understands, if you could again revisit that and just tell me why it's definitely a minor variance, because from my angle, I don't see that. So, okay, thank you.
Member Cardy?
Just to add to that, I think on staff now, we have the old chair of the old OMB, and as our in-house lawyer now, and she may be able to enlighten committee and staff on that as well. So she should be able to answer that for everyone.
Any other member of committee with a question of our manager? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no in-camera items listed. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank this committee for bearing with me for the last term of council as your chair, and we'll see what happens moving forward in December, because this concludes, although I will be presenting this report at the next council meeting. Date of next meeting is tentatively set for Tuesday, December 4th, but that'll be a new council. This meeting is adjourned.